question that you'll be asked. An example is trespassing. What about a dog barking? If you got a neighbor who has a dog, and let's say every night they put the dog outside, that's where the dog sleeps, and the dog ends up barking all night long. What is that?
I'd say it's a nuisance because they can get you for sound, not the same thing, music, stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. Another one is trespassing that they talk here. Certainly the police could come over to that person's house and ask them to, you know, shut the dog up or put it inside or whatever they may do for that. So the last ones here that we're going to talk about, probably the most popular one here is on 59, the common law system. So common law has two types here. It's criminal. It addresses behavior that is considered harmful to society. And the punishment usually involves loss of freedom, like incarceration. Whereas the civil, is an offshoot of criminal law, and then we just talked about some of the things that are associated with them. So this leads us, go ahead.
Sorry, I can't help but jump in. So I came in here because I wanted to watch Ben teach this part so that in the future I can help him teach the legal part because I'm an attorney in Florida and I will be here someday. But the easiest way, listening to Ben as your student, is the easiest way to understand that is there's two types of law, criminal and civil. And in your example of the car crash, the driver who ran the red light is probably going to be found criminally guilty of violating traffic codes, which is a criminal charge. You don't usually go to jail for that unless someone did end up being killed, in which case sometimes like someone who's just committing a simple traffic violation could be charged with manslaughter because they didn't intend to kill someone, but they had behavior that they should have known it could, which is kind of the same thing as the negligence standard that you were talking about. So not only is the driver of that car probably guilty of a criminal statute violation, but they also did not act as a reasonable person should act, which was that sentence that you said, Ben, about a reasonable person acting with, I can't remember what the end of the sentence was, but what it meant was, Ben was trying to say, as a reasonable driver, he would have never ran that red light. So you were acting as a reasonable person, with foreseeability. So if you had stopped and thought about it, every time you guys drive, if you stop and think about it, why do you follow the rules? Well, because if you don't, it's reasonably foreseeable that someone could get hurt. So we as regular people who are good people, we actually follow the laws, mostly, or we do what we think is right because we don't want to hurt someone by accident or on purpose. And so that's what the law is. It's criminally and civilly are two separate different things, like the OJ case. So criminally, he's found not guilty because the standard in a criminal case is you have to prove the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's a very high standard to meet. Even someone in the case could be, the person did this crime, but if the evidence doesn't come in to prove it to that standard, the jury has to find the person not guilty if they're following the law. And I did criminal defense for a while, and it's always hard. That's a hard pill to take for a lot of people. Well, how does the guilty person go free? And yes, it's terrible, but it's there to protect us because we want it to protect the innocent people. And in the eyes of the law, we're all looked at as being innocent unless and until the court of law finds different. So that's why there are two separate standards. In a negligence case, which is where the word tort comes from, that driver is a tortfeasor. Have you ever heard of that term? Tortfeasor. So that means they committed a tort. A tort is a civil damage, like when you cause civil injury to someone. So, like if I intentionally come and hit you with my hand, I could be criminally liable for a battery or an assault, but you could also sue me for civil battery. And so that's where it comes in. So normally the standard is, what would a reasonable person do? Because how do we know in any given situation, like maybe that person had a heart attack. And so in that case, they're not going to necessarily be criminally liable because you can't prove that they intended to commit that crime. They still might be civilly liable if, let's say, they've been having heart problems for 3 days and chose not to go to the doctor. But if it just suddenly happened, you can't really say someone's negligent because they weren't acting differently than the reasonable person would act. So it's kind of like your objective standard, that's the reasonable standard. So that's probably the easiest way to understand those two.
That makes makes sense. I'm just making some notes.
You did a good job teaching me.
That's fantastic. That's the type of criticism we're looking for right there. Constructive criticism that we're looking for right there. So, you know, we talk a lot about this right here. What would a reasonable person do? Was there a reasonable doubt? Can we prove there's a reasonable doubt? Good points here. You know, I think about with the Olympics now, full stream. You think about Greg Louganis. You guys remember Greg Louganis? He was a diver, right? He won the Olympic gold, probably back in the 90s sometime. And then it all went downhill from there. One night, I think he was out, I think it was like in Nebraska or something, like in the middle of nowhere. He was drunker than a skunk on a tree trunk, and he's driving his car, talking about manslaughter, and that's exactly what ended up happening. He ended up running somebody over and killing them. So in that case, would that be what a reasonable person would do? No, a reasonable person may pay money for a taxi or Uber to come, whereas this one, it was actually, he killed somebody. So not only was he criminal, but also for civil, because it was just what they say here specifically, again, is reasonable man of ordinary prudence, which is the, you'll see that throughout whenever we're going through and talking about these. All right, so the last one here is this one that kind of dovetails into the other ones here that you're going to see on the exam, is the administrative and regulatory law. And these are put in place to what Ronald Reagan says, keep the honest man honest, right? We trust but verify. So we put these in place, these administrative controls, the administrative laws or regulatory laws, to keep everybody in check. And specifically, for your exam, you probably will see mostly common law on your exam. So it's important for you to spend more time on that. But when we go through and talk about some of these ones that we're about to get into here, let's just give you some easy ways to remember these. So first is going to be this thing called SOX. SOX. Sarbanes-Oxley. So this was passed in 2002. And the way that I usually remember this right here is the, if you recall, Shoeless Joe Jackson. Anybody remember the story of Shoeless Joe Jackson? I think it was in the 1918 World Series that the Chicago White Sox made the World Series. And Shoeless Joe Jackson was a player on that team. Well, what happened was out of the 9 starters on that team, Jackson was one of them, he and the other people that were starters took money from investors to tank the World Series. And if you ever go and look it up, that's why that team was called the Black Sox. So when I think of Sox right here, an easy way for me to remember it is Shoeless Joe Jackson, he accepted money from investors to commit fraud and specifically for gambling purposes. And that is what this is for right here. It's for protecting investors and trying to protect them from fraudulent activities. Interestingly enough, you can go on and read in your book. She does a great job of explaining this in the book here, but there's a couple of ones that come to mind specifically for the Sarbanes-Oxley one here. Enron and also WorldCom. So specifically, they talk about any board of directors are responsible and could face criminal penalties if certain misconduct is done, so they're held responsible. Now, you know, in my opinion here, this is just me talking, I think that something like this should be for somebody at OPM, right? Held accountable, right? 41 million identities are now out and about in public. So should we add criminal penalties for negligence? Was that person negligence, or did they not have enough funding to do their job appropriately? Those are just rhetorical questions. But it kind of spawned some creative juices there to hopefully get one of you guys to create that law for us in the future. So in the mid-90s, I think that a lot of folks, whether it was in first George Bush or Bill Clinton, that came up with the idea of, hey, I'm tired of getting my healthcare information leaked out there. And a lot of people spell this like hippo, with 2 P's. But I think once you understand what specifically this is, you'll understand that it's not. It's Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So it gives us some assurance, if you will, that the data that we're giving up is going to be safeguarded. Seems like every time that I go to the doctor, I don't know about you guys, but every time that I go to the doctor, I'm signing something for HIPAA, something new. And you read it and you're like, didn't I just sign this, 6 months ago when I was in here? But oftentimes they